Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the All Portable Discussion Zone. It's a bi-weekly live stream all about amateur radio portable ops. And my name is Charlie. Call sign is November Juliet 7 Victor. And with me this evening is one of the two co-hosts for the show, Brian W7JET. And then also with us, I'm pleased to introduce to you tonight's guest, Jim KF7E. So welcome to both of you. And of course, as always, we have our characters in the chat room, all of you guys who are regulars and some who are new. We appreciate you being there. Go ahead and leave a comment in the chat if you have a question or a comment, and we will be sure to respond if we have the time and it's applicable. Also, don't forget that this show is converted to a podcast about 24 hours after the show airs, and so you can catch it on most podcast players. And so with that, let's get caught up on what's been going on the past few weeks in our lives of amateur radio. And so I'll just start with myself. Let's see. So yesterday, I did a couple of Summits on the Air activations because, and they were close to home, desert peaks. It was beautiful weather. The Mexican poppies are out, and it was 70 degrees, 69, 70 degrees, and a couple of tough peaks I haven't done before. Just 2 pointers. The reason it was close to home is because there's just so much snow everywhere, snow and mud because of all the weather. But also I gave away 8 3D printed Morse code paddles recently, and those are off in the mail. And I wish I could have given more out, but that was a fun thing. I did a little giveaway recently. And coming up, I think next week, this coming weekend, my wife and I are planning a backpacking trip. There's a possibility there will be a SOTA in there, but I'm not quite sure. Summits on the Air activation, but it's in the Superstition Wilderness. I'm not sure if that's a Parks on the Air activation either, but I'll have to look into that and find out. But some fun stuff coming up. Spring's here, and in Arizona, it's we don't have the snow that everywhere else has, except for up north in Flagstaff, we've got tons. But that's about it for me. Let's swing it over to Brian.
Greetings, everybody. Let's see what happened with me. Well, today I was flying. I was ran out to California and dropped off some people in Hawthorne and then John Wayne, and flew back and literally got back in the door not more than 10 minutes ago. I spent my day yesterday. You can see over my shoulder back there, the back of my amplifier. The tube let go yesterday and took out the diode that protects the meter circuit. So I spent part of the day troubleshooting that, and then did a few other things. And been flying a lot. Haven't been able to do SOTA because with work, all the places I've been going to do SOTA have been under feet of snow. I mean, feet of snow. I had some pictures. I shared them with Charlie, and maybe I'll pull them up later. For those, there's a SOTA peak up in the shoal area called Greens Peak, and the snow at the turnoff, the levels on the side of the paved road for the turnoff for Greens Peak right now are above the roof of the excavator that they have, or the front end loader that the highway department has there, that they're pushing the snow back from the sides of the road with. The stop sign, the very top of it, is just poking out of the snow right now. So it's deep up there. So no snow and no SOTA in Shola, but I'm going to Prescott this Thursday for work, and I think I might be able to get Two Rock Mountain in on Thursday. So there's a good chance I'll be doing SOTA this week on Thursday. That's what I got going on right now. Actually, one other quick thing. The W1AW Portable 7 is coming up, not this Wednesday, but the following Wednesday. I am the state coordinator for that, and we are going to have all kinds of operators on the air, so we should have a really, really good showing for the W1AW Portable 7. I was able to operate it back in for the Centennial, and I got this nifty thing here from my station from the league because I operated W1AW7 from the house. And this time around, I'm actually getting to coordinate the whole thing. So it's been interesting. I got a whole schedule ready to go, and there's going to be lots of operators. So look out for Arizona. If you need it for work all states, chances are we'll be on one band in the mode you need. Anyway, cool. Back to Charlie.
Cool. And then you also you did one other thing SOTA related, right? You didn't you?
Oh yeah, I completely forgot. I also did a SOTA POTA presentation on Thursday for the Central Arizona DX Association, where I know Jim from. And that was a really good time. I went on for about an hour and probably could have kept on going, but at some point I got to give this a rest because everybody can only take so much beauty for so long before I got to get out of the way. I don't want people to fall in love. So anyway, back over to Charlie.
Okay. All right. Let's swing it over to Jim. Jim, welcome to the show. I appreciate you having you. And if you can unmute yourself and talk to us a little bit about maybe what you've been up to in ham radio lately.
Well, greetings, one and all, and nice to be here and see some smiling faces that I know. And yes, I don't think I like to go up in the snowy country on a snow summit on the air when your antenna is probably below the snow level. That would be kind of tough.
Yeah.
I've done that, but not much fun. It's hard to send code when your fingers are all wrapped up in mittens.
Yep.
As per usual, I think for my situation here, I've been on HF a great deal, fighting the ups and downs of the magnificently active solar geomagnetic and other storming. We've had some major flares, a couple of X-class flares, which are the biggies, M-class flares coming out every few hours, and the sun's been really active. So it's caused some interesting conditions here for us to work through, and it has not resulted in no contacts, but it's influenced the timing and the distance and the places that we do talk to. But there've been some surprisingly good stuff coming through, and I've been amazed at this point in the brand new sunspot cycle how high it is. It's really much farther advanced and much more exciting than a lot of the not so exciting experts back in NASA and other places said it was going to be. But we're off to a great start.
Yeah, I mean, even Saturday when I was on the summit, I turned over to the contest on 10 meters sideband just to kind of see what was going on, and I was hearing people from all over the world. 10 meters was wide open.
10 meters is fantastic. Yes, I mean, even for the seed contest, 10 meters was in great shape. I think I worked 380 Qs or something during the CW contest in about 100 band countries.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's good.
Yeah. All right, Jim. So let's start off by I wanted to ask you kind of a couple personal questions. If just get us, as well as you're able to answer. Where are you from originally, and what was your line of work or your career when you were growing up?
Where am I from originally? Well, I guess that would be the San Francisco Bay Area. My family was located there. I was born in Oakland, California, and I lived in the Bay Area for most of my formative years, including my early radio years, different cities around there. My family also had a place up in the Napa Valley, which gave me the opportunity to have my very own private radio room where I could close the door and do nothing but radio.
Wow.
That was great. At one point, my family lived right across the street in downtown San Francisco from the FCC office on Battery Street. And I had to go in there for a test. In those days, you start out with a novice class test by a private person. And then when you upgraded, you went to get an FCC test in the FCC office. There's no such thing as escaping that, because that's the way you had to go through the program. And my first examination was in front of this guy who said, as he looked down his nose at the piece of paper with the application for the exam, he says, WN6ZSC. Oh, you're the guy that lives across the street. We hear you all the time. And that does not give you much confidence in passing the code, but I did.
Yeah, cool.
So I got into I got into the higher class licenses there, and I didn't like Morse code to start with, but you had to do it. That's the way to get into ham radio. A examination given by an individual, not a government guy, 5 words a minute. I think there was 20 questions, 25 questions, and you had to wait and sweat bullets to get the results back in the slow mail. And I remember I got mine back just before Christmas in 1967. That was the best birthday present or Christmas present I could ever hope to imagine. And it made my life turn around, because that's all I started doing was talking to people on the radio, much to the chagrin of my family.
Well, that's all right. What's your strategy? What was your strategy for learning Morse code and getting up to getting going with it?
The strategy, my parents had some friends whose two sons were slightly older than me, and one of them was a good friend of mine who got me into electronics before we got into ham radio. We traded junk, build things, shortwave receivers, stuff like that, and never thought about getting on the air. But after some period of not seeing him, we went over to his house for dinner or something, and I went and said, "Where's John?" "Oh, he's up in his new radio room in the loft in the garage." So I went out there, and he was hunched over this receiver with old-timey headphones on, with the old straight key. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Shh, I'm talking to Alaska, man." "Well, you can't do that. Shh, I got a ham license. I can do it now. Shh, shh." And so I just sat down and listened for all the dits and das. And when he finished that, he explained what he was doing, how he got into it. And he said, "I think you should do this. In fact, I'll introduce you to the guy that gave me the exam. He lives here in town, nice man." And he sort of forced me into it. And it took me a long time to learn the code. I learned it off records, 45 RPM records, which I still remember dearly because of
Okay.
the delivery of the guy that did this was so unique. And my friends pushed me into it, encouraged me strongly. How's that? And I got my ham license, and I went on to enjoy it in subsequent years, so much to the point that I found that that's all I did.
Yeah. Well, so what was on those records? How did they do it? What was his strategy that on those records? Did you just send
A,
each of the letters?
dit da. B, da dit dit. Error.
Really?
Dit, 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 dit.
I've heard stories about those records and people having nightmares about them to this day.
Yes, I occasionally, in a really bad case of indigestion, when I go to sleep, I hear error, error.
Okay, well, so you got into it, and then eventually got pretty good at it. Along the way, were you in any clubs then, and now are you in any clubs? And kind of what was your community like? Kind of from the time you started. You said you started with it was just you and your friends. Obviously, you have a lot of years behind you now.
We don't talk about how many.
Yeah, I won't talk about how many, but you any clubs that you are a part of or were, and then also any other communities?
Well, that's a little difficult to answer because the clubs that I belonged to in those days would have been high school clubs until I got into college, and then they had a bigger, better club. But most of the high schools did not. I went to a couple of public schools there in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they had no understanding and interest in that amongst the students. Only strange people. Pardon?
I said some things never change, I guess.
Yeah, but I did go to another school down in Pebble Beach area, a private school, and there was plenty of room there and trees, and I established a couple of friendships with guys who were interested in it also. One was a student from Costa Rica, which is very unusual because he had permission to operate with his Costa Rican call sign in California. And so we put together a radio club, and it was fairly successful. We had a few people there, and that was my high school years for the most part. And at the same time, I did something a little bit different. I joined the U.S. Navy Marine Corps Mars program, which is for those who don't know it or not aware of it, it's a volunteer program where you help the military under certain conditions with emergency traffic and health and welfare traffic during times of emergency, like aircraft carriers catching fire and things like that. We pass messages by Morse code and teletype.
Wow. Okay. Any other? You have anything right now, Brian?
No, I'm listening.
Okay. What about this British First Class Operators Club? Tell us about that.
Well, that's a good club. That's a little later down the road. The British tradition, Crookfinger, T at 3, also calls for associations based upon mutual interest. And this one, radio communications, goes very far into British history because they were working on code. Everybody's working on code back in the old days in the same competition. And the British were very much in the forefront of this as well. And so as it was in the United States, people would get on the air before there was an FCC or anything else, and would start playing on the radio, experimenting. And then at some point, this became organized. The governments got involved, licensed people. And then after that, it was the aficionados would have to stick together and make sure that they made their voices heard, so that some agencies of these governments, both here and elsewhere, wanted to control that, not let private citizens have it. And most of the development was being made by private citizens. So this gave the foot in the door to some of the authorities to continue to allow people to get a license and operate as private amateurs. And of course, they would form clubs to common voice get heard, and put inputs as needed to the various licensing authorities in these countries. And the British club, First Class Operator Club, is limited to 500 members around the world at any one time. It's invitation only. There's a few other clubs like this around the world in various countries, but this is probably the longest, best known one that I could think of anyway, that I'm aware of. And they have the high standard of operation, good code, good practice. And not everybody agrees on what good practice is, but generally consider, don't call people names, don't send stupid things on the radio, and have the highest regard for the art of CW. And I want to mention that again, the art of CW, because it's not just mechanical, there's an art form to this. And they like to make sure that that's a social club, and that they have activities around the world a couple of times a year. They have dinners where the spouses are invited, and they have a great social thing going along with a great camaraderie and respect for the continuation of the excellence of the CW arts.
Oh, cool. Well, that sounds like a prestigious group to be a part of. You should be honored. I'm sure you are. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I wanted to also ask you a little bit about where you've operated before. I've talked to you kind of in the pre-interview about some places you've operated, and you've done some amazing things. So there's a few I'll make sure I ask you if you don't hit them. But tell us a little bit about some of the places, some of the more memorable or well-known places, or some of the most memorable to you places that you've operated before.
Well, that probably would take 2 podcasts. Most of these were very honorable, memorable, and I guess in great company. I went on a few trips by myself. I went on my first DXpedition, which is for those who may be not too familiar with that. You get your radio on HF predominantly, and you go travel someplace that's very rare, not too many hams on. Often it's under some form of travel distress. Airlines don't go there. You have to find your transportation. Things can happen to you. But you try to operate from a place which is either a very rare country or entity, a place that doesn't have any ham radio operators resident on it. And I went off when I was, 19 years old, I think, in 1972. I was not quite 20. And I went off to the South Pacific by myself for a few weeks. I came home one day and told my mom and dad, I got a great idea for the summer. They said, what's that? I said, well, I want to go down to Samoa and go to the islands of Tonga, which is a separate island country, and some other places down there. And I'll be gone about 3 or 4 weeks. And when they picked themselves up off the floor, we said, have you planned this out? I said, oh, sure. I got friends down there already. They're looking for me. I got the whole plan. I'm going to haul my radio equipment with me and about 6 big trunks. It's all done deal. And they said, well, have a great time. So I did. I went off down to the South Pacific. I took 600 pounds of radio gear in 8 big crates. And I got there, went through Hawaii, got to American Samoa, Pango, and my luggage wasn't there. I had a radio in my suitcase, but all the heavy stuff didn't make it, and so I had to go on to the next stop and on the promises that the stuff would get there. So I had to adapt, overcome, and all that kind of glory talk. And that it finally caught up to me, and I was able to establish a really nice radio station on 3 separate islands, 1 or 2 of which had not been operated from before this manner. And it was pretty much portable, not like sitting outside under the stars necessarily, although we did plenty of that, on the beach. I wish I had pictures for you. It was a lot like SOTA on the air, except this is mosquitoes on the air. There were lots of mosquitoes and other things to worry about, but it was a great deal of fun, and people lined up for hours to talk because the countries that I was operating from were very rare and everybody wanted a QSL card. And I was just down there running mostly CW, a little sideband voice at times, but it was almost all CW, including in those days the new amateur radio satellites, the Oscar, was it 3 maybe or 5? I got on with some CW by manually keying a Drake. I guess it was maybe a 10-watt transceiver, but it was crystal controlled. Looked a lot like a CB set. In fact, I think they made that from a CB set and put it on VHF on 2 meters. And in those days, you didn't have computers, you didn't have pre-programmed things to point by. So my friend and I went out in the banana patch behind his house, actually in the pig barns out there, and we built a 10-element antenna, and one of us would take turns cranking the antenna around where we thought the sound peaked the best, and the other guy would be keying the B plus, the 12 volts, to the transmitter, which is not keying a keying circuit, it's keying the electricity that drives the radio. Not very sophisticated, but we made some good CW contacts through those to Hawaii and Los Angeles and a couple of other places. And that was the first time I think that had been done down there.
That sounds very memorable.
That's awesome.
Yes, and from there I went to a couple of other islands, did pretty much the same thing, climbed up into coconut trees to put up antennas, got covered with rats that live up in there, ants, all kinds of interesting stuff. Met lots of great people.
Have you been on any other DXpeditions? That one sounds absolutely amazing. And for being 19, it shows kind of where our society is in a way where, you could just pick up and do something like that. But are there any other DXpeditions you've been on?
Oh, yeah. I liked that so much. When I went back to school in the following year or two, I started plotting to go back and do this adventure thing again. And I went in 74 with a couple of other guys back down to Samoa, and we set up plans to take a boat 300 miles north to the Tokelau Islands, which are also known as the Union Islands. And they're pretty much off limits because they're just 3 low coral atolls. There's probably no more than 3,000 people live there, and there's no place for visitors to live. So you've got to take everything: food, water, gasoline for the generators, kerosene for the lanterns, everything. And 3 of us planned to go up there and do this. And the shipping was a little tight in those days because of the Arab oil embargo. And a lot of those countries were very short on money to buy fuel to transport things around the islands. So our schedule didn't hold together, but we eventually made it up to the Tokelau Islands, got permission to stay. I was going to be there for 3 weeks. The fellow that went with me was going to be there for a few days on each island and go back home. And I elected to stay on the island, take my chances. And I got stuck there. The boat that was eventually coming to get me in 3 weeks, as it left the harbor in Apia, Western Samoa, it struck the reef. And I was called from the place that I was staying to come running down the beach to the very small government radio station, which is about the size of a 2-meter 440 radio, ran 20 watts of single sideband on HF, and that was used to talk down to the main office a couple hundred miles away. And they said, Jim, are you sitting down? We have some news for you. You want the bad news or the good news? I don't care. He said, well, the bad news is the boat that was coming to take you off the island has struck a reef and sank. We can't find another one available for hire for any time soon. The good news is you get to stay in the islands and enjoy our hospitality for who knows how much longer. And so I was down to a few gallons of fuel for each of the kerosene lanterns and the stove, which was an old kerosene stove, and the generator. And I had some freeze-dried backpacking food that I bought with me, and that sustained me for 6 more weeks. I was actually stuck on this island for 6 more weeks. That would make it about 9 weeks total. And it was a ball. It was an absolute blast. The people were wonderful. I received more of an education in the culture and custom of Polynesian Islanders than I ever thought I would. It was a super experience on all fronts.
Amazing. What would you say? I mean, I think you've been in more than just these two as far as DXpedition goes. What would
Those
you
were
say?
the little ones.
Yeah. So what was your, tell us maybe two things. What was your biggest one you went on? Maybe most memorable or most well-known? And also, what one did you go on that was the most rare DX entity for you in today's terms?
Okay, the answer to the last question first. The Tokelau was one of the top 10 most wanted countries in the world at the time. And I was very successful and lucky to do that. And then the other one was probably Uganda in Central Africa, because that had been off the air for political reasons under Idi Amin for a long, long time. And they threatened to eat and barbecue, not necessarily in that order, anybody that caught operating transmitters in Uganda.
Wow.
So a couple of guys and I went down there. One of them was a doctor who worked in the hospital. Another one he was born there. And between the three of us, we managed to effect permission, and we went down there in 1993. There's only 3 of us, but that was the second top 10 most wanted country that I've been in. I don't think too many hams get to go to even one of them, and I got to go to 2 of them, which is a real tribute to the people that put these together. But it wasn't big. It was just hard to get to, and it was a lot of fun because in those days, the military was still in charge. You weren't too sure what they were looking for when they were looking at you and your stuff, but we got by all right. It was an extremely valuable experience, and it lasted for about 3 weeks, and it had more hams per hour calling us than I can remember anywhere else. I think we counted 300 contacts per hour for hours at a time.
Wow.
And that's pretty high rate stuff. Those are certainly memorable. I was on one smaller one, maybe 8-9 people off the coast of Mexico in 1985. We went down to some islands off the west coast of Baja called Revillagigedo, and that's not a place that you get permission to go to either. It was very hard to do. And so we had a good time there. It was very primitive. We had to fly sort of old planes to get there. We came home on a boat that was sold to the Mexicans after World War II. It was a derelict ship from the Navy, and they refixed it, got it all working again. Their job was to supply the islands and keep the Japanese fishermen out of the poaching fish out of their waters. And they had a big deck gun, 3 or 4 inch deck gun, and they had 4 shells left for it because that caliber was no longer made. There's nobody had anymore. So they were very careful about firing warning shots, but they were also afraid if they fired the shot on the cannon, it might shake something loose and the ship would sink. It was very unusual circumstances, but it was an interesting island. And on the way down there and back, the fellow that I was flying with in the small plane, we almost crashed twice, not for any particular negligence, but just bad weather. So that was not too much fun, but it does bring up the haunting possibility that these things don't come free. And if you don't plan things very, very well and have some good luck to boot, that you can get hurt or killed. And I don't think QSL cards are worth dying for, but it's a lot of fun to go on these high risk trips and come back.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it maybe makes the summits on the air and the parks on the air seem like just small potatoes, right? It's this serious business.
I I didn't have rattlesnakes to contend with, so you get your choice.
Okay, yeah. Let me pause here real quick, Jim. There's a comment in the chat from Andy. I know Andy. Andy's a good guy. Says, good to see Jim, KF70 out there on the RF interwebs. Jim is a radio legend in our neck of the woods, a wealth of knowledge to our local Arizona community. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Andy's a great guy too.
Well, thanks, Andy.
So another of your experiences, we could probably, you're right, we could probably go on for a long time about all your different DXpeditions. How many DXpeditions have you been on?
I've lost track. I was gonna mention just two more. You said big ones.
Sure.
Those are kind of interesting too, because we just been through a few of those on the air this past week. We still have the one in the 3 Bravo 7 Mary, I think's their call sign, for another day or two. These are big operations put on with lots of donations and financial support from clubs and individuals around the world, and they're massive in scale and danger. The big one in the history books last month or so was to Bouvet Island in the Antarctic. I've never gone there. I've been to some plenty rare, out of the way places, but they're all warm places, and I like that. These guys are down in the cold climate, and I don't like those. But a couple of them that I've been to also were big category. In 1993, we went to Ghana to operate during one of the big contests, the CQ Worldwide DXCW contest, and that was great because I used to live in Africa working for the government, and I liked Africa a great deal. I operated from several places there. And so we went back. I was back working in the States then. And some of us went to Ghana on that. And that was a big group, internationally known, primarily British operators, but some big ones. And then in 2004, another big group, part of the group was the same people. We went to Rodriguez Island, which is 600 kilometers farther east than Madagascar and Mauritius. And if you miss Rodriguez Island, you don't hit anything until you get into Western Australia. It's a long way of nothing down there. And that was a big operation with about, I think, 26 people. We had installed 20 something antennas, beams, Yagis, stuff like that, all with muscle power. And we had lots of transmitters, big generators, the whole works. And it was a really big operation, but extremely successful. And that was very memorable. They're all memorable.
Jody VE5SAR says DXpeditions only go 3 places: cold places, castaway places, or places where you might get shot.
or eaten.
Okay. Yeah.
There is a place over off the coast of India, which has been in the news in the last year or two because the government tries to keep people off of that, especially crazy hams. And somebody snuck ashore and he was shot and killed by bow and arrow.
Oh boy.
Oh, so a friend of mine here who's a ham with electrical engineers out with
that's breaking
the cellular network that they were going to put in Western Africa. And he was telling me some of the places that they went, they literally only stayed there for the day and they would fly back to South Africa at the end of the day because it was that questionable being there. They had a small army escorting him around for the work that he was doing. One place, they told him it's okay to spend the night, and he's in this hotel and it had a mini bar, and he pulled a beer out of the mini bar and he went out on the balcony to go drink the beer, and he saw all these white trucks off in the distance in a well-lit area, and he's like, what are they? What are they? And he realized that it was a UN peacekeeping force. And he goes, I got to get the blank out of here. I don't belong any place that there needs to be a UN peacekeeping force.
Well, I saw a presentation from one of our other DX club members here in the Phoenix area, the Central Arizona Club. And Brian, you'll know Ned, AA7A.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
When he gave a wonderful talk of his trip to Western Africa, they drove for miles and miles with a driver and armed guards and stuff. And at one scene in this DXpedition video, he's pointing out this guy getting out of a truck. Oh, there's Willie from Germany. He's our 10-meter operator. There's Harley from the United States. He's our 20-meter operator. And there's Kasanga. He's the 9-millimeter operator. And he was the guy carrying a machine gun. And then lots of places like that.
Yeah. And the Scout 75 says technically he was killed by the arrow. The bow was an accomplice.
Yes. I never really ran into trouble like that. I worried about it in Uganda, but I was in a lot of countries over there at one time or another, and you kind of learn like a sailor learns to avoid the troubled waters and sail around the storms. But when I was in Mozambique the first time, the war was supposedly over, but while we were walking around going to dinner that night, you could hear the lights went out. And in the distance was the boom, boom, as the rebels blew up the top power poles. And this had been going on so long, everybody just lit their lights and, got their kerosene stoves going again. And we had a wonderful meal and an art show of all things in a war zone. They had an art show with Portuguese artists there. And we went back to our hotel where the people in our work party were staying. And the last thing I heard was, stay in your room. If you need something, call, but don't go out of your room at night. And if you hear anything funny, don't open a window. And so I said, fine, very good, thanks a lot. So I went to bed, and not very much longer, I heard the typical 3-shot burst sound from an AK-47, and it was not very far away. And I took the advice. I rolled out of my bed, laid down on the ground, which was protected from flying glass and everything else, and I went back to sleep. So you just have to
deal with it, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's transition a little bit. We've got, I don't know, probably another 20 minutes left, but there's so much more to talk about. Let's stay on the topic, though, of portable ops and not necessarily DXpeditions this time, but there's some other things that you do where you operate portable. You mentioned to me that you've done mountaintop portable before there was such a thing as Summits on the Air.
I make that claim because I think it was that long ago. I was right after they invented mountains and before they invented the award.
Okay. So you want to tell us a little bit about any of those trips?
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have pictures because they didn't, we had the little Kodak instant shot cameras that took film pictures, and I don't have any of those left, and I think my climbing pal doesn't either. But you do have a picture, I think I sent you for the mountaintops. Over in New Mexico, Las Cruces, which is where I went to college over there, there were some beautiful climbing rocks, some big mountains that go up to, I think, 9,000 feet. And they're called the Organ Mountains because they look like the pipes of an organ. And the approach to them is not too bad, but the final couple of 100 feet is all cliffs. And it's good quality climbing rock, but it's, we had something up there called the Organ Mountain Handhold. As you're climbing up on rappel, you would put your hand up to reach on the only place where you could grab for lifting yourself, and there would either be a cactus or a rattlesnake sitting there.
Oh, jeez.
That was the Organ Mountain Handhold. So more than one cases, we see guys throwing snakes off over behind their backs. But once you got up to the top of them, they were very perfect takeoff, nothing higher. And in those days, the Tentec company had produced its Power Mite series, the PM1, PM2, PM3, whatever. And they were just single or double band. In some cases, I think they're 3-band battery operated 2-watt direct conversion receivers. And they were perfect for this sort of thing. They weren't fancy, but they were perfect because they were lightweight and they lasted and they worked well. And we would take fishing poles, just plain old carbon fishing poles or bamboo, cut to a length that we specified that we wanted for each antenna, and would have these, the tops of mountains are rounded, but they're not very big at the top, maybe 25, 35, 45 square feet, and complete drop-offs on the side. Really dangerous stuff. You don't lose your footing up there. And we plant these nice little poles up there and run the dipoles between them. So the dipoles were maybe 3 feet off the ground, but the ground was 8,000 feet up off the rest of the ground. And the signals were terrific with 2 watts. And it was so good that occasionally we'd get these very strange responses from people. I think we were on, might have been 20 meters with 2 watts. Might have been 40, I can't remember. But we were calling, and this guy in California was calling CQ. And so we answered him. And he came back, he said, "Well, you're 599 here in Southern California, name is so-and-so, running 1,000 watts and stacked 40-meter beams. What are you running?" And we said, "Well, we're running 2 watts input power at 9,000 feet into a dipole." And then he came back and said, "Sorry, QSB, can't hear you anymore, bye." Didn't want to talk to us.
9,000 feet. Cool. Well, that's awesome. That's fun. That's right up our alley. We'd love to do the Summits on the Air stuff, Brian and I. There's another thing you do, though. You drive around, it sounds like, too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what you do there, if you're comfortable.
Oh, sure. Back in about 22 or 3 years ago, I was working over at White Sands, NASA's facility over there, and I got this job over here to come to work with Motorola and the Iridium spacecraft. So the job entailed me driving over here for 2 weeks, get 4 days off, go back to New Mexico, and then come back here for 2 weeks. And so that's a long drive. And I put the radio back in the pickup truck, and I put a CW filter in it, and I began to operate the radio back and forth. And I worked a lot of people because I was on the road in daytime hours, nighttime hours. The ICOM 706 that I was using has only a 90-watt transmitter, but it's all bands. And I began to work all sorts of people all over the world with it. The conditions weren't the best. That was not a peak year, but I continued to do that until I moved over here permanently. And then I had so much fun doing it, I just kept the rig in the car, and I drove around the desert all my trips operating mobile. And I used to work a little shift work when I was here, and I can remember more than one friend being regular on the bands. One good friend was a Japanese fellow, Dr. Shin, a pediatrician and a classical musician who was also a great CW artist. And he was on there at like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning when I was getting off work or going into work. So we'd have regular contacts with Dr. Shin in Tokyo, Japan on Morse code, 40 meters in
As
motion.
you were commuting. Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of people like that. He's not the only one, but it's not too hard to do. My recommendation, though, is people say that's not safe. That's worse than texting or something. And that might be true, but the person that is in charge of citing you for that, when he pulls you over, has to operate the computer, look at the siren, and operate the radio, plus drive the car, plus watch you. So he's got less attention on driving than you do operating the radio. So I always just really, really careful and respectful, and don't drive around in traffic when it's the worst, danger. But a lot of open highway over there wasn't too bad.
Yeah, I can't imagine how you could. I can't even say. I have to concentrate so much just to send Morse code and copy it. I can't imagine how you also drive. That's great.
I copied it in my head.
Oh, well, that's good. That helps, right?
Yeah.
So, Joe,
you don't have.
Yeah, go ahead.
I kept a little logbook. Let's see. The ones I got were for the most part. Well, I don't have one quite here in reach. The ARRL has small logbooks, not full size, 8.5 by 11. I used those for a while, but they're cost a few bucks. So I eventually went down to the supermarket or the office supply place and just bought some of these little spiral bounders with that show up, that style.
Oh yeah. You just
there's enough room on there to put all the essential stuff to keep it legal. So all my contacts I logged as best as I could, keep it legal. And I have.
So you you paper log on mobile.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's great.
Well,
All right.
you can pull over and write and then get back on the road.
Yeah. Okay, Jim. Let's shift gears again here a little bit. There's a few other questions I wanted to ask you that hopefully get time for. Actually, two main topics. Let's go into. Let me think here. Which one should we try first? Let's try this one. So, tell me a little bit about your Morse code paddles that you prefer most. Tell me what you like the most right now. What are you using most of the time?
Right here on my bench, I have a Bigali single lever simplex mono. I have a chevron key built in England. I have two Vibroplex. Actually, I have a shelf full of Vibroplex up here. I have one built by a mysterious company that copied their design. I think it was actually Vibroplex people, but it was a little heavy duty version of their Vibroplex, and it was built for ships and aircraft. And I think they only built 4,000 or 5,000 of them, and most of them are lying at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. They got lost in World War II. And I have one of them here. That's one of my pride and joys. I have
what's
in
your
the
favorite,
Jeep.
What's your favorite key to use from your home though right now? Like if you wanted to get on the air right now, which one are you using?
Well, like I say, I have the two of them up here. Well, it won't stretch. I have two of them plugged into the bug paddle outlet, and two of them for the bugs, which are operated on a different circuit, 2-wire circuit versus a 3-wire circuit. I have them all set to go at any one time, and I can just change off. I also have several straight keys, but I don't send with those as well as I used to. I'm a little embarrassed to get on. I used to be able to send as a novice with my left hand 35 words a minute on the straight key, and I don't think I can send 5 words a minute with it anymore.
Wow. So what would be the reason you'd I just don't know. I just don't know. I'm just naive or whatever. But why would you need to switch between different paddles? Is there a reason? Just for fun?
Yeah. Let me go back just a moment in history a little bit and approach it from that light. Early on in Morse code, the prime users of Morse code were maritime mobile ships at sea. It got into the aviation world, and they developed two types of code: the international Morse code and what was called the continental or landline code. And they're very similar, but the original code is used by like railroads in the old movies. The code was made not by a tone. It was made by a sounder, which the letter was the not a sound being on, but the timing between a click and a clack. Which says when you pushed down on that, it closed the circuit, and somebody far away down in the next town heard a click, and when you upkeyed it, it was a clack. And so you would be listening to clicks and clacks, not tones. And those were old, high current, directly connected telegraph systems, and they needed bigger contacts to handle the higher current. So for the most part, you would get the flat, straight key, what they call pump handle, or the more familiar terms now, the J38 type key, J36 type key, which is the standard design. You see those all the World War II movies and other things. They mounted them on planes, Jeeps, and it was strictly up and down. And it was an easy motion to learn. It was simple to train people to operate them. There wasn't much to it. The bug keys are semi-mechanical in that they have a spring device so that when you send dashes, you close the contact and it sends a dash as long as you put your fingers on it. The other side, when you close the dots, makes this a repetitive string of dots as long as you have it pressed. So it's semi-mechanical. You make half of it and the key makes half of it, mechanical bugs. And those were a lot easier for people to work on for a living because you didn't get the glass elbow and some of the things that went wrong with your arm when you spent your life doing that. So they were very popular and in wide use all over. And when I guess about the time World War II came out, a lot of people were using all kinds of codes. The Morse code is adaptable into any number of languages. Japanese, Russian, each have different numbers of characters and punctuation marks. And there was no electronic keyers per se where you use the paddles. Those got developed a little bit later, and they didn't hit the mainstream probably until the 50s. But people began building them out of vacuum tubes, and the key would now have 2 levers or paddle contacts with no springs. There was a magnetic tension or a spring to keep them apart, but you actually press them back and forth, And as code speeds got higher, and I suppose hams got into contesting and DXing, and everybody wanted to sound like a speed demon on the air, these things were able to send faster with less mistakes than the hand-operated kind. And so I think it's come to 2 things. It's what the person likes the most, which is most comfortable to them. And some people have several different kinds of keys and switch back and forth to them all the time. And then the other thing is what you're doing with it. I should probably point out one more thing. In the older original days, Morse code was taught to the military and maybe people at sea and pilots, stuff like that. And then after all that hostilities were over in the 50s and 60s, it was available to the public to use, but it was getting a license. The ARRL's tenants for that, one of the things they wanted to do and thought important of it was the friendship aspect of amateur radio communications between 2 people in different countries, melting the Iron Curtain, so to speak. That phrase comes back to mind. And people would not have the most latest stuff in some of those countries. So they would make keys, literally make them out of scratch material parts. So you got some all kinds of mechanical keys and not very many electronic keys. And I got involved in it in those days when friendship was the big thing. That's what we were trying to do, is make conversation with people and enjoy it. And anything that made you sound good and was easy to use for the length of a conversation, which is not 599 goodbye. It would now be, in the old days, would be a whole story and about your kids and where you live or what you do for a living, stuff like that. And concomitant with that, that carried on through the 70s and into the 80s, I guess, where there were certain countries that if you were engaged in conversation with them on CW or phone, you might get a call or knock on the door from the military intelligence or the FCC because you're talking to somebody in Cuba or something like that. But those days have long passed, and now everybody wants to get on, have conversation, and find out more about each other. And I think this is anything that facilitates better, more accurate sending in your hands is what you want for that. And if you can send better with a straight key or a bug, more power to you. If you can send like most people do with a paddle, that's good too. But with a paddle, you have a tendency to crank the speed up far faster than somebody can copy, and probably you can't copy it yourself.
Yeah. Yep. So that answers that question. The other question along the same lines that I was going to ask, by the way, that was really fascinating. And in fact, what's his WA7JNJ says, loving the stories and getting to know Jim a bit. Great show. So appreciate that.
Thank you.
For just a person that's been maybe just starting to learn Morse code, has been doing it maybe at a slow speed for a while, but anticipates getting faster and becoming more comfortable with a paddle. What would you tell them as far as adjusting the paddle? I mean, there's a lot of different opinions out there. What do you like as far as you get that brand new Magali? Do you adjust it at all, or you get a different kit paddle? I'm talking just specifically the iambic paddles. What do you like as far as tension and spacing? Do you what's your preference?
That's not an easy question to answer. I like it when it's just right.
Okay.
I have actually gone to the point of let's see if I can get this up here. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Where's my camera? This is the chevron. It's gold plated. This is an iambic design here. Two two paddles, and it's got magnets, as a lot of them do now, that oppose. That's where you get your spread apart, keep them from keying, and then you squeeze these to overcome that.
Yeah, the tension.
Yeah, and there are spring-loaded types, and there are magnetic tension types. They have different characteristics, and one other thing that a lot of people don't seem to stop to think about, if the pivot points are, I'm going to show this, about here and here. Oops. There we go. You can see roughly where the pivot points would be under this plate. The length of the portion behind is not the same as the front, where the finger pieces are in front of that. So there's a ratio of length. That makes sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, let's say you have an inch. It doesn't look like it. But let's say you have an inch on the front part of this paddle where you're keying it, and 2 inches back here, or 2 inches up front and an inch back here. That changes the length of travel and to some degree the weight that you have to put on them. So each one's a little different. And when you get one of these, or when I get one, what I do is I take it and I adjust it coarsely where I think it's pretty close. And I fine tune it where I really get it about as good as I think I'm going to get it. And then I'll take some coins, various coins for weight, and I'll lay the key on its side, and I'll put some weights on there until it overcomes the tension and it starts to make a dot or a dash. And I'll record that weight and record the distance between the contacts for each of the two contacts. And that way I have something to go on. So if it changes later on, I know what to do. Or somebody borrows it and changes it. So each one of these things, including the various forms of the iambic paddle, you do the same thing. You adjust them to where the speed, the action required to produce dots and dashes is not overly tiresome, but is easily reproducible so that you can send easily with it. Yeah, if you have to struggle with it, it'll be harder.
Yeah, that makes sense. So would you say that okay, so yeah, it's what's comfortable, like you said, what's the most comfortable. Would you say for you, I know for me, and maybe Brian too, it's a little tighter is better in my mind. I like a really tight.
I prefer shorter travel as well.
Yeah, is that what do you think about that, Jim? Do you agree?
If I have tight gaps in my Jeep, you can't tell what I'm sending. Mine are wide apart because I slapped that key side to side. And when you're bouncing around, that's all you can do. If you're driving down a nice road and it's smooth, you got much more control. You can tighten things up a little bit.
Okay, got it. Yep, good.
And
all right,
believe
Jim.
it or not, Brian, I know two guys that are pilots that have CW installed in their aircraft.
You know, the only way I could do it in the airliner was I would have to use a microphone and a sounder and do it on sideband because the radio doesn't have CW and it only has upper sideband,
it's
unfortunately.
only got upper sideband, yeah, right. Well, you can whistle in the microphone.
Brian, do you have any?
No, I'm just enjoying listening to Jim. I get the pleasure of being able to chat with Jim pretty much anytime I want to on the on the repeater because Jim lives, right down the hill from me. I could probably get on my roof right now and wave, and you might be able to see me down there in Queen Creek.
Line of sight, optical wavelength.
Well, Jim, it's been very interesting. You've carried the conversation, which I love, because you had a lot to say, and I'm sure. I get the feeling that you have so much more to say. Maybe we'll have you back on sometime to continue this discussion. But it's been a pleasure having you, and you've been a great guest.
Well, thanks very much. It's nice to see both of you guys there today, and people in the peanut gallery there. Thanks for your comments. And if you find yourself interested in making contacts on code or whatever, don't hesitate to give me a heads up on my qrz.com address, email, or whatever. And I'm frequently on a couple of local repeaters here as well.
Cool. Sounds good. What's this here? David M says, I remember reading a story in CQ magazine about a ham radio who operated a CW mobile up Alaskan Highway. That would have been fun. Yep. All right. Well, I think
he had his key widely set on the Alaskan Highway.
Yeah, widely set for sure. All right. Well, we're at that time. we're at that time, Jim. So I'm going to say adios to you. Just stick around after we end the stream. Stay in the online, and we'll continue the discussion afterwards. But we're going to end the stream. So I am going to say adios to everybody. Have a good one, and I'll turn it over to Brian for the last little bit in the sign off.
Yeah, no, Jim, thanks for coming on. It was great getting to see you. Like I said, we chat quite a bit on the radio, and I always enjoy running into you when you're at the meetings. So it was good to hear some more of your story. You're definitely one of those guys.
Thanks. Ditto. Thanks for what you're doing.
Appreciate it.
All right, 73, everybody.